sometime after midnight, with rain tapping against the windshield and the world reduced to the lonely glow of a parking lot lamp. Claire Morgan sat in her aging sedan, counting the last $900 she owned while her son slept in the back seat, his fragile lungs straining with every shallow breath. Each wheeze echoed the choices and losses that had corroded her life. Her marriage ending with a 3-sentence note. The ICU job she devoted 12 years to disappearing when the hospital closed. The suffocating months of minimum wage work that still couldn't protect her from eviction. Now, with homelessness days away, the weight of failure pressed on her chest as she whispered promises she didn't know how to keep to the sleeping boy behind her. But desperation has a way of sharpening hope, and when she stumbled across the listing for a county tax foreclosure auction, something inside her sparked. An abandoned farmhouse, 15 years untouched, rumored to be cursed, but listed at a price that felt impossible, $750. It was madness. Everyone told her so. But at the courthouse, surrounded by investors in polished suits, Claire raised her trembling hand anyway. And when the man competing against her stepped back, offering her a soft nod that carried both sympathy and respect, the gavel fell. A tarnished brass key landed in her palm. She had no idea then that the house she just gambled her life on wasn't just broken. It was hiding a truth that would shake an empire, resurrect a legacy, and rebuild her shattered world piece by piece. The drive toward the foothills felt like crossing into another life, one she wasn't sure she was ready for. When Claire and Lucas reached the property, the house rose through a tangle of overgrowth like a wounded relic, paint peeled to bare wood, shutters dangling, the porch sagging as though years of silence had bent it. Inside, the air was thick with mold and rot, sending Lucas into violent coughing that forced them back outside within seconds. With nowhere else to go, they slept in the car that night, wrapped in a thin emergency blanket while the forest murmured around them. Claire fought sleep, her thoughts a blur of fear and what-ifs, until a faint glow appeared in an upstairs window. A soft flicker, like a candle wandering behind the glass. It vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her unsure whether she'd imagined it. Morning brought an unexpected visitor. Ruth Thompson, a gentle woman with silver hair and warm muffins, who introduced herself as the nearest neighbor and spoke quietly about the home's former owner, Dr. Margaret Winters, a brilliant herbalist who once healed the whole community before vanishing without a trace. When Ben Carter, the man from the auction, arrived with his teenage daughter and offered to assess the house free of charge, pieces of the past began stitching themselves into a story Claire hadn't asked for, but suddenly felt destined to uncover. Inside what would have been Lucas's room, Claire stepped on a loose board and pried it up, revealing a metal tin that time had tried and failed to hide. Inside lay photographs of a woman with striking mismatched eyes, a brass key, and a leather journal filled with botanical sketches, field notes, and scattered warnings. The final entry chilled Claire. Someone had broken into Margaret's lab, someone known only as RD. Someone she believed would not stop until he had her research. Ben revealed he had built a hidden bunker laboratory for Margaret behind the orchard years earlier, a place only she had the key to. With the brass key from the tin, they cut through the overgrowth and found the entrance, cold concrete walls covered in vines. The lock turned effortlessly. Inside, nothing was disturbed. Dust hadn't settled. Tools, jars, and notebooks sat arranged with meticulous care. A safe beneath the workbench held more journals, a sealed letter, and a cassette tape labeled insurance. When they played it, Margaret's trembling voice filled the room, documenting visits from Richard Dalton, CEO of a pharmaceutical empire that had once invested millions into a failed treatment for a rare, devastating illness. Dalton's voice eventually entered the recording, sharp and cold, delivering threats wrapped in corporate confidence. It was clear Margaret had discovered something priceless and lethal. Trouble arrived wearing a polished smile. A man in a black Lexus pulled into the driveway claiming to be from the county, offering Claire $25,000 for her newly purchased home. His voice held polite authority, but his eyes drifted too deliberately toward Luca's. Hours later, Ben discovered industrial chemicals dumped into their well, poisoning the water supply. The next day, Lucas's inhaler malfunctioned, the medication swapped for water. Soon after, Ben checked Claire's car and found the brake lines cut, a silent death sentence waiting beneath the chassis. Every threatening sign pointed toward Dalton Pharmaceuticals, and the pattern mirrored the fear etched into Margaret's final words. Claire contacted her former supervisor, Dr. Lisa Chen, who reviewed photos of Margaret's research and delivered a staggering truth. Margaret had created a near cure for Carter syndrome, a condition with no effective treatment. The formula worked, really worked, and its value positioned it as a multi-billion-dollar breakthrough. Claire then reached out to the FBI, who confirmed an open investigation into the Dalton family involving missing researchers and illegal acquisitions. When journalist Catherine Monroe arrived to document everything, Claire felt the ground shift beneath her. She had stumbled into a story bigger than survival, one woven with danger, corruption, and a legacy that demanded justice. A violent storm rolled through the hills the night Lucas pressed his face to the window and whispered that Dr. Winters was outside, standing beneath the oldest apple tree, pointing to the ground. Claire, Ben, Ruth, and the children braved the torrential rain, flashlights slicing through darkness as thunder shook the orchard. Beneath the tree, they dug until their hands struck metal. Inside a waterproof container lay another microcassette and a final written note. Margaret's voice, recorded the night she disappeared, trembled with urgency. Dalton had threatened her again, warned her that an accident would make everything seem tragic but unremarkable. She planned to flee into the forest with her remaining research, but her voice suggested she no longer believed she'd survive. The tape ended abruptly, the final sound a door slamming and fading footsteps. Coordinates encoded in her journal led FBI agents deep into Pisgah National Forest. Days later, they called Claire with the truth she already feared. They had found human remains, Margaret Winters, murdered and buried in a shallow grave. Catherine's article exposing the cover-up exploded across the country, shattering Dalton Pharma's reputation and sending the company into freefall. Stock markets plunged. Executives scrambled for distance. And suddenly, Claire's fight for survival became a national reckoning. Justice gathered momentum through months of relentless trial proceedings. Journalists filled the courtroom. Families of Carter syndrome patients watched with trembling hands, and Claire took the witness stand twice, her voice steady as she described each threat and discovery. When the cassette recordings played, Dalton's cold warnings echoing off the courtroom walls, the jurors leaned forward, faces tight with disbelief and anger. The most devastating testimony came from Dalton's own daughter, Victoria, who broke down detailing decades of concealed threats, buried research, and coded internal memos that hinted at the resolved problem of 1989. Soon after, the former head of Dalton's security gave a final, frail confession from a hospital bed, admitting he had killed Margaret on Dalton's orders. By the time the jury returned, the courtroom held its breath. The verdict landed like a tremor, guilty on all counts. Dalton, at 81, received a sentence that ensured he would die in prison. And as the world watched a pharmaceutical empire crumble, Claire and Dr. Chen moved forward with securing the patent in Margaret's name, ensuring her discovery would remain affordable, protected, and accessible. Margaret's stolen legacy was restored, her life's work finally allowed to shine. Months later, the once crumbling house transformed into the Margaret Winters Foundation, its gardens restored, its clinic offering free care to anyone who needed healing. Lucas, no longer shackled by constant medical emergencies, led visitors through the herb gardens, explaining each plant and the notes Margaret left behind. Sophie walked beside him, their friendship deepening into a gentle closeness that felt as natural as the wind moving through the trees. Ruth tended the gardens with a quiet pride, humming softly as she worked. And under the apple tree where Lucas first said he'd seen Margaret, Claire and Ben exchanged vows in a small ceremony marked by candlelight, hope, and the presence that seemed to drift through the orchard like a blessing. Patients traveled from across the world to pay tribute to the woman whose work had saved thousands. A granite memorial bearing Margaret's name stood among the flowers, honoring her as a healer, a scientist, and a protector. Claire often ended her evenings in Margaret's restored study, lighting a single candle. And sometimes, when the flame flickered just so, a lavender-scented breeze moved through the closed air, gentle and watchful, as though the home's first guardian still lingered, finally at peace. As twilight settled across the orchard and fireflies drifted above the grass, Claire watched her newfound family laugh beneath the apple trees and felt the truth settle in her heart. She had not simply bought a house for $900. She had stepped into a legacy waiting for a voice, a life waiting for restoration, and a story that demanded courage. She had gambled everything on hope when the world offered her nothing, and that single act of bravery had rebuilt her life, brought justice to a forgotten healer, and changed the lives of thousands. For everyone listening now, let this be your reminder that even when your world feels like it's collapsing, the moment you choose courage over fear can become the turning point of your entire life. If this story moved you, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts that need them. And before we close, I want to hear from you personally. Where are you listening from, and what time is it right now as you hear this story?